The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Ballroom had never witnessed anything like it. 200 guests, designer gowns, champagne flutes catching the light. Then Richard walked in. He cut through the crowd like a blade, expensive black suit, jaw set tight, eyes locked on one person, Amaka Okafor. She stood near the floral arrangement she had spent 4 weeks designing. Her red gown swept the marble floor. Her braids fell past her shoulders in careful, elegant waves. She was the most composed woman in the room, until Richard pointed at her. His voice sliced through the string quartet. You think wearing a red dress and working for rich people makes you better than where you came from? A fork clinked against a plate somewhere. Then silence. Phones appeared. Glasses lowered. Conversations died. Amaka's grip tightened around her clutch bag. She did not move. She did not speak. 5 years of building her company from nothing, and it was all about to be torched in front of the city's most powerful people. Richard was not finished. I funded her first event, and when she finally had money in her pocket, she disappeared. Just like that. Used me and left. A famous socialite in the corner began live streaming. A politician at table 7 pretended to check his watch. Amaka opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The humiliation pressed down on her like a physical weight, hot, suffocating, ancient. This was the version of herself she had worked so hard to bury, the girl from the broken apartment who nobody believed would ever be anything. Richard took another step toward her, and then a voice. Not loud, not angry, not emotional, just dangerous. Leave my woman alone. Every head in the ballroom turned at the same moment. At table 3, the most private table in the room, cordoned off with no explanation, a man was rising slowly from his seat. Tall, still, unhurried. His white dress shirt was open at the collar. His black hair was slicked back from a sharp, angular face. Along the left side of his neck, a tattoo curled upward, dark ink disappearing beneath the fabric, the only visible sign that this man's story was far older and far darker than any ballroom. Tane Yin did not raise his voice. He never needed to. A senator at table 12 recognized him first. The man's face went pale. He set down his champagne very carefully, the way a person does when they realize they are standing too close to something they cannot control. And the CEO of a shipping conglomerate recognized him next. He placed his hand on his wife's arm without explanation and squeezed. Word passed through the room without sound. Tane Yin. Richard had no idea. He turned toward the man in the white shirt, face still burning with entitlement. And who exactly are you? Tane Yin moved through the crowd the way water moves through stone, quietly, inevitably, without asking permission. He stopped between Amaka and Richard. He did not look at Richard immediately. He looked at Amaka first, just for a moment. Just long enough for her to see something in his eyes that nobody else in the room could read. Then he turned to Richard. You are Richard Adeyemi, Tane Yin said. His voice was quiet enough that the nearest tables had to lean in to hear. You operate Adeyemi Premier Properties. 3 office buildings in Victoria Island, 1 residential complex in Lekki, all of which are currently financed through Meridian Capital Group. Richard blinked. Meridian Capital Group is one of 11 companies I control directly, Tane Yin continued, which means your buildings, your income, your reputation, exist at this moment because I have not yet decided otherwise. The ballroom was so quiet that someone could hear a champagne bubble break. 200 guests, 200 phones, 200 people watching Richard Adeyemi understand in real time that he had walked into the most expensive mistake of his life. Tane Yin did not step closer. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch Richard at all. He simply held the man's gaze for 3 full seconds, just long enough to make sure the message had arrived, had unpacked itself, and had settled permanently into Richard's bones. Then he turned back to Amaka. He extended his hand. Not rushed, not performative, the natural gesture of a man who had already decided how this evening would end. Shall we? Amaka looked at his hand. She looked at the room. She looked at Richard, who had not moved, who seemed to have forgotten how to move. Then she placed her hand in Tane Yin's. He led her away from Richard, through the ballroom, past 200 witnesses who parted for them without being asked. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Nobody helped Richard pick up the dignity he had just dropped on the marble floor. As they reached the ballroom doors, a senator leaned toward his aide and whispered 3 words. God help him. Before we continue with the story, I need a quick favor from you. Kindly hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me, do you think Richard will back down or push further? Because in the next episode, Amaka vanishes without a trace, and Tang Yin loses control for the very first time. Amaka had arrived at the Grand Meridian Gala at 6:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the doors officially opened. This was deliberate. She had planned this event. She knew every floral arrangement, every table linen, every lighting cue. The charity gala for the Children's Healthcare Foundation was the largest commission her company had ever received, and she had poured 6 months of her life into making it perfect. She told herself that was why her hands were trembling slightly as she stepped out of the car. It was not because of the card she had received 3 days ago. Anonymous. No return address. 7 words written in ink so deliberate it looked like a warning. I know you will be there. So will I. No signature, just the initial. R. She had almost canceled. Almost. Then she had put on the red gown, pinned her braids back on one side, and decided that Richard Adeyemi was not going to take this from her, too. The ballroom was everything she had designed it to be. 3 tons of crystal suspended above a marble floor that reflected the light like still water. The guests arrived in waves, politicians with careful smiles, CEOs with louder watches than personalities, socialites who photographed the centerpieces before the events even began. Amaka moved through them the way she always moved through rooms she had built, efficiently, invisibly, with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly where every thread of the evening was tied. Nobody needed to know that the woman responsible for all of this had once eaten Gary twice a day so she could save enough for her first event planning software. She was straightening a floral arrangement at table 11 when she felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, just a shift in the room's atmosphere, that particular change in air pressure that arrives before something breaks. She turned. Richard was standing at the entrance. Black suit, expensive, jaw set. Eyes already on her the way they had always found her in crowds, like he had installed something in her years ago that still sent him a signal. He did not come toward her immediately. He accepted a glass of champagne. He greeted 2 men near the door. He laughed at something, taking his time, letting her watch him take his time. Then he crossed the room. You built all of this? He gestured around the ballroom without looking at it. His eyes stayed on her face. On whose money, Amaka? I am working, she said quietly. This is not the place. You think wearing a red dress and standing in a room full of rich people makes you something different? His voice was still low, but it carried. The nearest table went quiet first, then the next. I know exactly where you came from. I was there. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere nearby. Then silence. Not the polite silence of a room giving 2 people privacy. The sharp, collective silence of 200 people choosing to listen. Phones appeared. Slowly at first, then all at once. Angled upward, cameras live, capturing every word. I made her, Richard said, and now he was not talking to Amaka anymore. He was talking to the room. His voice had found its performance register, the one he used in boardrooms when he wanted the room to agree with him before he finished speaking. I funded her first event. I gave her the connections, and the moment she had money in her pocket and my name in her contacts, she disappeared. Just like that. Amaka stood completely still. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times. What she would say, how she would hold herself, the exact tone she would use. But nothing in those rehearsals had accounted for the feeling of 200 phones recording her face, while a man she had once trusted dismantled her in public piece by piece, in the room she had spent 6 months building. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Richard stepped closer. You used me. Say it. Tell them the truth for once in your leave my woman alone. The voice came from table 3. Not loud, not angry, not urgent, just final. Every head turned at the same moment. The way crowds move when something more powerful than curiosity pulls them. At the most private table in the room, the one that had been cordoned off with no printed name, no explanation, a man was rising slowly from his seat. Tall, completely still. No expression on his face that could be read as either threat or performance. His white dress shirt was open at the collar, the sleeves rolled to the forearms. His black hair was pulled back from a sharp jawline. Along the left side of his neck, a tattoo moved upward. Dark, deliberate ink that vanished beneath the fabric. The only visible evidence that this man carried a history far older and far heavier than anything in this ballroom. Tang Yin did not adjust his cufflinks. He did not look around the room to confirm that people were watching. He simply stood, and the room reorganized itself around that fact. A senator at table 12 recognized him first. The color left the man's face. He set his champagne down with enormous care and did not pick it up again. The CEO of a West African shipping conglomerate recognized him next. He placed one hand on his wife's arm and squeezed once without explanation. Word moved through the room without sound, passed in glances, in the sudden straightening of spines, in the way 3 separate conversations simply stopped mid-sentence. Richard had not received the memo. He turned toward the man in the white shirt. His chin lifted. "And who exactly are you?" Tang Yin moved through the crowd without rushing. People stepped aside before he reached them, not because he asked them to, but because standing in his path felt like a choice nobody wanted to make. He stopped between Amaka and Richard, close enough to make the geometry of the situation clear, far enough to make it clear he did not need proximity to win. He looked at Amaka first, 1 second, long enough for her to see something in his eyes that had no name she could put to it. Not pity, not strategy, something older than both. Then he turned to Richard. "You are Richard Adeyemi," he said. His voice was low enough that the nearest table strained forward to hear it. "Adeyemi Premier Properties, 3 office buildings in Victoria Island, 1 residential complex in Lekki, all currently financed through Meridian Capital Group." Richard blinked. "Meridian Capital Group is one of 11 companies I hold directly," Tang Yin continued, "which means your buildings, your income, and the reputation you just tried to use in this room, they exist at this moment because I have not yet decided otherwise." The room was so quiet that someone could hear the ice shifting in a glass 3 tables away. Richard's jaw tightened. His hands balled at his sides. Every instinct in him was pushing him to speak, to fill the silence the way he always filled silences, with volume, with aggression, with the assumption that certainty was the same thing as power. But something had changed in the room and he could feel it even if he could not name it. "You have no idea," he started. "I know exactly," Tang Yin said simply. He held Richard's gaze for 3 full seconds, not blinking, not shifting, just long enough for the message to arrive, unpack, and settle permanently into Richard's understanding of how this night had gone. Then he turned back to Amaka and extended his hand. Not rushed, not dramatic, the unhurried gesture of a man who had already decided how this evening would end and was simply waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. "Shall we?" Amaka looked at his hand. She looked at the room. 200 faces, 200 phones, 200 people watching her make a decision. She looked at Richard, who had not moved, who seemed to have misplaced the ability to move. Then she placed her hand in Tang Yin's. He led her through the crowd. The room parted, nobody spoke, nobody followed, and nobody helped Richard Adeyemi locate the dignity he had just left on the marble floor. In the corridor outside the ballroom, away from the cameras, Amaka stopped walking. She turned to face him. Her shoulders were perfectly straight. Her chin was level. If you did not know what to look for, you would not see the slight tremor in her fingers or the way she was breathing very carefully through her nose. "I did not need that," she said. "I know," Tang Yin replied. "Then why?" He held her gaze. When he answered a question, he answered it once. Because he was wrong. She studied his face for several seconds, searching for condescension, for calculation, for the particular look men wore when they had just done something they expected to be repaid for. She found none of it. They found a private terrace on the 14th floor. The city lay below them in grids of gold and white, stretching to the dark edge of the water. Amaka stood at the railing. Tang Yin stood slightly behind her, at a careful distance. She had removed one earring without realizing it. She was turning it over in her fingers. "How do you know Richard's finances?" "It is my business to know the finances of anyone connected to the people I care about." She turned then. "I am not connected to you." "Not yet," he said. It should have landed as arrogance. It did not. His voice held no performance in it, only the flat certainty of someone who had stated a fact and was prepared to wait as long as necessary for it to be confirmed. She put her earring back in. "Tang Yin," she said quietly, testing the name. "People do not say that name easily." "Most people do not say it at all," he replied. "They use other words." "What words?" A pause. The city moved below them. Words not worth repeating in polite company. She almost smiled. She caught herself. But then she let it happen anyway. Something shifted in his eyes, a degree, a fraction, the way a locked room looks different when someone finally remembers it contains a key. They stayed on the terrace for 47 minutes. By the time they returned inside, the gala had resumed. Richard was gone. The live stream had been viewed 14,000 times. The campaign began 4 days later. It was not loud. Richard was too intelligent for loud. It was the kind of destruction that arrived quietly, A rumor planted in the right ear at the right dinner, a whispered question about the source of Amaka's early funding, an anonymous review posted on 3 separate platforms within the same hour. Unprofessional? Overpriced? Connections more than competence. Within a week, 2 corporate clients postponed their contracts with no explanation. A hotel partnership she had spent 4 months negotiating went silent. Her operations manager, Chidi, placed a spreadsheet on her desk without meeting her eyes. "We've lost 30% of projected revenue for the quarter," he said. Amaka sat very still behind her desk. Outside her office window, Lagos moved at its usual pace, loud, relentless, indifferent. She had been here before. Not this office, not this desk, but this exact feeling. The floor shifting beneath something she had built with her own hands. She had survived it at 23 with nothing. She would survive it now. What she did not yet know was that the damage was being contained from a direction she had not looked. She found out on a Tuesday. Her accountant, Mrs. Fashola, she called at 8 a.m. with confusion in her voice, the particular confusion of a precise woman encountering numbers that do not conform to her understanding of events. "The Hartwell contract," Mrs. Fashola said, "the one you said fell through." "It fell through," Amaka confirmed. "Then why has the full advance payment cleared into our account?" Amaka set down her coffee. "That is not possible." "I have the transfer record in front of me. It came through a company called Yeon Bridge Holdings, registered in Seoul." Amaka was already on her feet. She pulled the Hartwell file herself, called the client directly. The Hartwell events director sounded surprised to hear from her. Surprised in the way people sound when they believe a conversation has already been handled. "We assumed you knew," the woman said carefully. "We were contacted by a representative. They settled the advance and guaranteed the contract. We thought it was a restructuring on your end." "Who contacted you?" A pause. The representative identified himself as acting on behalf of Tain Yin. Amaka stood in the center of her office for a long moment. Around her, her staff moved between desks, answering calls, preparing proposals, keeping the company in motion the way they did every morning. She thought about a conversation on a 14th floor terrace, a man standing at a careful distance, a hand extended across a marble floor. "It is my business to know the finances of anyone connected to the people I care about." She had told him she was not connected to him. She pulled every contract that had gone quiet in the past 3 weeks. She made 6 phone calls over the next 2 hours. By the time she finished, she had found 4 separate interventions, quietly funded, carefully untraceable, routed through 3 different holding companies that all dissolved back to the same origin point when you followed them far enough. Tain Yin had been rebuilding what Richard was dismantling. Not loudly, not in a way that announced itself. In the exact same way he had stood at that table for 6 months before the night of the gala, present, watching, intervening only enough to keep the damage from becoming permanent and never once asking her to notice. Amaka sat with that knowledge for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. He answered on the second ring. "How long?" she asked. No greeting, no explanation. He would understand the question. A pause that was 1 second too short to be uncertainty. 14 months, Tain Yin said. "Before we continue with the story, I need a quick favor from you. Kindly hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me, did Tain Yin go too far, or did he not go far enough? Because the person who has been feeding Richard every secret inside Amaka's company is about to be revealed. And it is the last person she would ever suspect." She did not confront Chidi immediately. That was not how Amaka operated. She had learned early that the most dangerous thing you could do with information was use it before you understood it completely. So she sat with what she knew, turned it over carefully, and watched. It took her 3 days to be certain. Chidi had been with her from the beginning. He had been there when the company was operating out of a single rented room in Yaba, when she had 2 clients and 1 laptop with a cracked screen. He had worked late without being asked, had taken pay cuts during the lean months without complaint, had been the first person she called when the Hartwell contract came through. She had trusted him the way you trust the ground beneath your feet, not because you check it every morning, but because it has never moved. She checked the access logs on the company server herself, late at night after everyone had gone home. The exports were there, client lists, pricing structures, contract negotiation notes, the private communications with the Hartwell events director, all pulled from Chidi's login, all time-stamped in the hours after she had left the office each evening. The most recent export was from the night before the anonymous reviews appeared. Amaka closed the laptop. She sat in the dark office for a long time, looking at nothing, letting herself feel the particular weight of being betrayed by someone you had chosen to believe in. Then she did what she always did with feelings that arrived at inconvenient times. She filed them somewhere she could find them later and stood up. She called Tane Yin, not for help. She had already decided what she would do about Chidi. She called him because in the past 3 weeks, without quite noticing how it had started, he had become the person she called when the day produced something she needed to say out loud to another human being. He answered on the first ring this time. She told him what she had found. She did not dress it up or make it smaller than it was. When she finished, there was a brief silence. "Do you want me to handle it?" "No," she said. "I want to tell you about it." Another pause, shorter than the first. "Then I am listening," he said. She talked for 40 minutes. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without interruption, without offering solutions she had not asked for. Somewhere around the 30-minute mark, she stopped talking about Chidi and started talking about the morning her first business fell apart, years before this one. The feeling of watching something you built with your own hands come apart in real time. How she had rebuilt, what it had cost. She had never told anyone that story in its entirety. When she finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "You rebuilt it alone?" he said. "Yes. You do not have to do that anymore." She did not answer immediately. Outside her window, Lagos was doing what it always did at midnight, refusing to be quiet, refusing to be still, refusing to let anyone forget that the city had its own momentum and you were simply moving inside it. "I know," she said finally. It was the most honest thing she had said to anyone in years. The weeks that followed were the quietest of Amaka's life, and somehow also the fullest. She confronted Chidi on a Wednesday morning, alone in her office, with the access logs printed and placed on the desk between them. She did not raise her voice. She watched him look at the paper and then look at her, and she saw the exact moment the performance of innocence left his face and only the exhausted truth remained. He had needed money. Richard had found that need and made it useful. It was a story as old as betrayal itself, and understanding it did not make it hurt less, but it made it something she could set down rather than carry. She let him go without involving the police. That was her decision to make, and she made it. Then she rebuilt the systems, changed every password, restructured the client communication protocols, and hired 2 people to fill the gap Chidi had left. Tane Yin offered resources. She accepted half of them, the half that was practical rather than protective. The distinction mattered to her, and he understood why without being told. They had dinner 3 times that week. Not in the kind of restaurant where being seen was the point, but in the quieter places he seemed to know. A Korean barbecue house in an unmarked building off Lagos Island, where the owner greeted Tane Yin by a name Amaka did not recognize. A rooftop somewhere that served jollof rice at midnight, with no explanation for why it was open or who else ate there. He asked her questions nobody had ever thought to ask. Not about her company or her plans or where she saw herself in 5 years. About the small things. What she had been afraid of as a child. Whether she had been a good student. What she had believed about herself before the world started teaching her to believe something smaller. She answered all of them. Slowly at first. Then with less caution. In return, she began to learn the geography of him. Not the version that existed in rumors and the guarded expressions of senators who recognized his name, but the version that appeared in small moments. The way he became still when he was thinking about something difficult. The way his accent shifted slightly when he was tired, Korean rhythms surfacing briefly beneath the precise English. The scar along his left hand that he never mentioned and that she did not ask about, not yet. One evening, sitting on her apartment balcony with cold tea going warm between them, he said something she had not been expecting. "I was not always this," he said. He did not gesture at himself or at the invisible empire the word this contained. He did not need to. "I know," she said. "You do not know yet," he replied, "but I want you to." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had stood between her and humiliation in front of 200 people without raising his voice, who had quietly rebuilt what her enemy had quietly destroyed, who stood at careful distances and asked nothing and listened as though her words were the only sound in whatever room they occupied. She reached across the small distance between their chairs and placed her hand over his. He turned his hand palm upward and held hers. They sat like that until the city went as quiet as Lagos ever gets. She disappeared on a Thursday. Tane Yin knew something was wrong at 7:43 p.m. when her phone went to voicemail twice in 4 minutes. Amaka did not miss calls. She did not let phones ring to voicemail when she was expecting a conversation. It was a small thing that only mattered if you knew her well enough to know it was not small at all. By 8 p.m., he had people moving. By 8:30 p.m., 3 separate teams had checked her office, her apartment, and the venue she had visited that afternoon for a site survey. Her car was still in the venue car park. Her phone was found 10 meters from it, screen cracked, the last outgoing call to Tain Yin's number. She had not made it. He stood in his operations room, a floor of his building that did not exist on any building directory, and looked at the information as it arrived, and felt something he had not felt since he was 19 years old and had not yet learned to convert every emotion into strategy. Fear, not for himself, not for what losing her would cost him in any calculable sense. A simpler, older, more devastating fear, the fear of a man who has found something he did not know he was missing and is now watching it disappear. He let himself feel it for exactly 40 seconds. Then he began. The warehouse was on the eastern docks, in a section of port infrastructure that had been decommissioned 3 years ago and sold to a holding company that dissolved 12 months later, a trail that would have taken a government investigator 8 weeks to follow and that Tain Yin's people had followed in 6 hours. He went alone, not because he had no backup. His people were positioned at every exit, on the water, on the road. But the man inside that building had sent a message when he took a maca, and the message required a personal response. The man was not Richard. That had become clear by hour 4 of the search. Richard was many things: obsessive, entitled, willing to burn things for the satisfaction of watching them burn. But this operation was beyond him. The coordination, the resources, the intelligence on a maca's movements, this came from somewhere older and more dangerous. Chief Babatunde Eze, 61 years old, legitimate face of a construction empire, silent stakeholder in 4 government infrastructure contracts worth a combined $9 billion. Contracts that depended on political relationships that depended on Tain Yin's competitors remaining competitive. Tain Yin's growing influence had been making those contracts nervous for 2 years. Eze had used Richard, fed him resources, pointed his obsession, let Richard believe the campaign against Amaka was personal revenge, while the real purpose was to send Tain Yin a message about the cost of expansion. Taking Amaka was the message. Tain Yin walked into the warehouse through the front entrance. There were 11 men inside. He counted them as he crossed the threshold the way he counted everything, automatically without appearing to look. Amaka was at the far end, seated, wrists bound, a cut above her eyebrow that was no longer bleeding. When she saw him, something moved across her face that she did not try to hide. Not relief exactly, something more complicated. The expression of a woman who had been sitting alone in a dark warehouse running contingency plans and is now recalculating because one of her contingencies just walked through the door. Chief Eze stood to her right, older than his photographs, more tired, the particular exhaustion of a man who has been powerful for so long that he has forgotten what it cost him to become so. Tain Yin, as he said, as though they were meeting for lunch. You could have simply stayed in your lane. Let her go, Tain Yin said. Or, Tain Yin did not answer that. He did not need to, because in the following seconds 2 things happened simultaneously. Amaka, who had spent the past 4 hours memorizing the positions of every person in the warehouse and working the zip tie against a corroded bolt she had found on the underside of her chair, freed her hands. And Tain Yin's people came through every exit at once. What followed was not a battle in the dramatic sense. It was the rapid, mechanical dismantling of a situation by people who had prepared for it thoroughly against people who had believed preparation was unnecessary because they held the advantage. The advantage evaporated in less than 3 minutes. Chief Eze did not run. He stood very still and watched his 11 men run out of options, and his face moved through several expressions before settling on the one men like him always arrive at eventually, the expression of someone calculating what can still be salvaged. You understand what I know, he said to Tain Yin. The contracts, the names. If I fall, I will not fall quietly. I am counting on it, Tain Yin replied. It took Amaka a moment to understand. Then she looked at Tain Yin, and he looked at her, and the faintest thing crossed his face that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. She had spent 4 hours in that chair. She had also spent 4 hours on her phone before the battery died. The phone they had not thought to take from her pocket because it was cracked and they assumed it was dead. She had documented everything she could hear, every name spoken, every number referenced, every detail of the network that Eze had been too comfortable to keep quiet about. Amaka had not been waiting to be rescued. She had been building a case. The story did not end in a single day. It rarely does. Justice moves in the particular way of large, heavy things, slowly at first, then all at once. Chief Eze's network unraveled over 6 weeks. The documentation Amaka had gathered, combined with the financial records Tane Yin's people had been compiling for 2 years, became the foundation of an investigation that reached into 3 government ministries and 2 international corporations. Richard, faced with the full weight of what he had been part of, made the decision that men like Richard always make when the cost of loyalty becomes too high. He cooperated. Completely. It did not save him. It simply determined the shape of what came after. The morning the first arrests were announced, Amaka sat in her office with coffee and the newspaper and felt something she could not immediately name. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter. The particular piece of a woman who has survived every version of the thing that was meant to destroy her and is finally, for the first time in a long time, simply still. Tane Yin arrived at 9. He did not knock. He had a key, which she had given him 6 days ago without ceremony, handing it over between one sentence and the next as though it were not significant, even though they both understood it was the most significant thing she had done in years. He placed 2 cups of coffee on her desk and sat across from her. They were quiet for a while. The city moved outside the window. "What do you want now?" he asked. Not the company, not the future in the strategic 5-year sense. He meant it the way he always meant things. Specifically, personally, stripped of everything except the actual question. Amaka thought about it. "This," she said, "Chao, whatever this is, I want more of it." He looked at her across the desk. In the morning light, without the context of ballrooms or warehouses or 200 watching faces, he looked like what he actually was, a man who had carried an enormous amount for a very long time and had recently quietly put some of it down. "Then you have it," he said. Outside, Lagos continued its permanent insistence on noise and motion and the business of living. Inside, for a few minutes, everything was very simple. Amaka Okafor had come to the city with nothing and built something from it, had survived heartbreak and betrayal and public humiliation and a zip tie in a dockside warehouse, and had come out the other side of all of it not softer, not harder, but more precisely herself than she had ever been. And across the desk from her, holding coffee, was the most dangerous man she had ever met. He was also, she had decided, the safest place she had ever been. She did not say that out loud. She did not need to. Some things do not require words when the person across from you has been paying attention all along,